Gravel crunched beneath the tires of Caleb Montgomery's battered Ford F-150 as he turned onto the unpaved driveway of his inheritance. For 3 days he had driven cross-country, fueled by cheap diner coffee and a desperate, suffocating need for a miracle. Behind him lay a ruined life in Chicago, a brutal divorce from Sarah, a failed logistics startup, and a mountain of debt held by merciless creditors at a predatory lending firm called Sterling and Hayes. Ahead of him lay 60 acres of overgrown, useless dirt in the desolate fringes of Owyhee County, Idaho. This was it, the sum total of Nathaniel Montgomery's legacy. His grandfather had been a ghost of a man, a reclusive watchmaker who had vanished into the American West after returning from Europe in 1946, when the attorney Thomas Reynolds had read the will in a sterile Boise office 2 days prior. He had handed Caleb a single heavy iron key and a manila folder containing the deed. There were no savings accounts, no secret trusts, just a dilapidated farmhouse rotting under the relentless Idaho sun. Caleb killed the engine. The silence of the high desert was absolute, heavy, and oppressive. He stepped out, his boots kicking up a cloud of alkaline dust. The farmhouse was a disaster of peeling white paint and sagging roof lines. It looked less like a home and more like a tombstone marking the end of the Montgomery bloodline. He unlocked the front door, the rusted hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of dry rot and old paper. The living room was Spartan. A faded plaid armchair faced a cold fireplace. Against the far wall stood a massive, ornately carved oak grandfather clock, its pendulum perfectly still. It was the only piece of furniture that looked as though it had been maintained. Caleb spent the first day ripping the house apart, searching for cash stuffed in mattresses or coffee cans buried in the pantry. He found nothing but moth-eaten clothes and decades-old receipts. By midnight, sitting on the dusty floorboards with a bottle of cheap whiskey, despair finally took hold. He was 34 years old, utterly alone, and facing bankruptcy by the end of the month. It was the clock that ultimately drew his attention. In the quiet of the night, the silence was so profound that Caleb felt he could hear his own heart. But as he stared at the grandfather clock, he noticed something odd about its design. The weights suspended behind the glass door were uneven, and the brass faceplate had a strange sequence of Roman numerals etched into the bezel numbers that didn't correspond to time. IV 97 tie. Caleb approached the clock. He remembered his grandfather's hands, always smelling of brass polish and oil, always tinkering with gears. Caleb reached out and pressed the numerals in sequence. 4972. A sharp click echoed in the hollow room. The false bottom of the clock's wooden case dropped open. Inside lay a heavy, sealed brass cylinder and a leather-bound journal. Caleb pulled them out, his hands trembling. He cracked open the journal. The pages were filled with intricate schematics, soil density calculations, and concrete curing times. The final page contained a hand-drawn map of the property, with a red X marked precisely 45 paces north of an old dead cottonwood tree in the backyard. Beneath the map, in his grandfather's elegant cursive script, was a single sentence: "The world thinks it burned in Bordeaux, but ghosts don't burn." The brass cylinder was a cryptex. Caleb spent the next 4 hours matching the dial to the date of his grandfather's military discharge. When it finally clicked open, it revealed a heavy, custom-milled key made of aircraft-grade titanium. By sunrise, Caleb was no longer an exhausted, defeated man. He was a man possessed. He drove to a hardware supply store in the nearest town and maxed out his final, overdrafted credit card to rent a compact Caterpillar excavator from a grizzled local named Hank Sullivan. Hank had eyed Caleb with suspicion. "Ground out by the old Montgomery place is mostly shale and hardpan," Hank had warned, chewing on a toothpick. "You digging a well, son?" "Septic tank," Caleb had lied smoothly. By noon, the yellow excavator was tearing into the scorched earth beneath the dead cottonwood. The Idaho sun beat down mercilessly, turning the cab of the excavator into a greenhouse, For hours, the steel bucket scraped against nothing but dirt and rock. Caleb was beginning to think the journal was the ramblings of an old man suffering from dementia. Then, at a depth of 14 feet, the bucket hit something that made a hollow metallic sealanging. The vibration rattled Caleb's teeth. He killed the engine and scrambled down into the massive trench he had dug. He used a hand shovel to clear away the remaining dirt. His blades scraped against smooth, reinforced concrete, and then a massive steel hatch. It wasn't a septic tank. It was a subterranean vault door, heavily reinforced with steel locking bars resembling the entrance to a Cold War-era missile silo. In the center of the hatch was a mechanical locking mechanism that perfectly matched the titanium key from the cylinder. Caleb inserted the key. It turned with a heavy, oiled smoothness that defied its decades in the earth. He grabbed the release wheel and threw his entire body weight into it. With a groan of releasing pressure, the heavy hatch swung upward on counterbalanced hydraulic hinges. A rush of cool, impeccably dry air hit his face. The smell was astonishing. Not dirt or mildew, but the distinct, sharp scent of aged leather, motor oil, and rich mahogany. He retrieved a heavy-duty mech light from his truck and descended the steel spiral staircase into the dark. The beam of his flashlight pierced the gloom, revealing a subterranean room the size of a commercial garage. The walls were thick, poured concrete lined with industrial dehumidifiers hooked to a dormant, silent geothermal power system. But it was the center of the room that made Caleb drop to his knees. Sitting in the middle of the spotless epoxy floor, resting on heavy-duty pneumatic jacks, was an automobile. It was draped in a custom-fitted, dust-proof canvas cover. With a trembling hand, Caleb grabbed the edge of the canvas and pulled it back. The flashlight beam danced over an expanse of flawless, deeply lacquered black paint. It illuminated swooping, teardrop pontoon fenders, a riveted dorsal seam running the entire length of the body, and an aggressive, low-slung horseshoe grille. Caleb couldn't breathe. Even someone with only a passing knowledge of automotive history would recognize the ghost sitting before him. It was a 1938 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic. Only 4 were ever built by Jean Bugatti. 3 were accounted for in the collections of billionaires and prominent museums. The 4th, famously known as La Voiture Noire, the black car, had been hastily loaded onto a train in Mosheim, France in 1940. To hide it from the advancing Nazi army. It was supposed to arrive in Bordeaux. It never did. It vanished from the face of the earth, becoming the holy grail of lost historical artifacts, with an estimated modern valuation exceeding $130 million. It shouldn't exist. It certainly shouldn't exist buried 14 feet under a failed farm in Idaho. "Grandpa," Caleb whispered to the empty room, "what the hell did you do?" He walked around the pristine machine, his mind spinning with the sheer impossibility of it. The car was perfect. The camel-colored leather interior was untouched. The spoked wire wheels gleamed. On a heavy steel workbench against the back wall, Caleb found a stack of military dossiers, forged shipping manifests dating back to 1945, and a ledger. He opened the ledger. It detailed how Nathaniel Montgomery, a seemingly low-ranking supply sergeant in the Allied forces, had intercepted the train manifest in Bordeaux. But he hadn't acted alone. There was a list of co-conspirators. Caleb recognized one of the names immediately, William Hayes, the grandfather of the men who now owned the predatory lending firm, slowly destroying Caleb's life. The grandfather of the local sheriff. Before Caleb could fully process the gravity of the ledger, the heavy thud of a boot hitting the steel spiral staircase echoed through the vault. Caleb snapped his flashlight off, plunging the room into absolute darkness. He ducked behind the rear fender of the Bugatti, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "I wouldn't try anything heroic," Caleb, a voice called out. The beam of a tactical flashlight swept across the room, followed by the metallic clack of a sidearm being chambered. Footsteps descended to the floor. The lights in the vault suddenly flickered and hummed to life. Someone had activated the generator on the surface. Caleb squinted against the sudden blare. Standing near the bottom of the stairs, holding a Glock 19 leveled directly at him, was Deputy Sheriff Logan Hayes. Logan was a thick-necked, arrogant man whom Caleb had briefly met at the diner in town 2 days ago. "You did the hard work," Logan said, a cruel smile spreading across his face as his eyes locked onto the Bugatti. "My family has been watching this dirt patch for 40 years. My grandfather knew old Nathaniel buried it here, but he could never find the exact spot. Your granddaddy was a paranoid, brilliant bastard. He rigged the whole property with dead man's switches. But you had the map." Caleb slowly stood up, keeping his hands visible. "Your family was part of the theft." "Theft is an ugly word," Logan scoffed, stepping closer, his eyes never leaving the car. "It was the spoils of war. Nathaniel betrayed my grandfather, cut him out of the deal and smuggled it stateside on a decommissioned cargo plane. My family has been waiting for the old man to die for decades. We knew he'd leave it to you." "You can't just take it," Caleb said, his mind racing. "How do you fence a $130 million ghost? The moment this car sees the light of day, Interpol, the French government, and every art thief in the world will be on you." "That's the beauty of it," Logan said, pulling a satellite phone from his tactical vest. "We already have a buyer, a private collector in Dubai who doesn't care about the vehicle's provenance, only that he has something no one else does. A shipping container is already on its way. You, unfortunately, had a tragic accident involving heavy machinery. The F-150 was crushed. Sad story." Logan raised the weapon, pointing it squarely at Caleb's chest. "Step away from the vehicle." Caleb didn't move. He looked down at the ledger resting on the hood of the car, and then back at Logan. A strange sense of calm washed over him. The terrified, indebted accountant from Chicago vanished, replaced by the blood of the man who had stolen the most famous car in the world from right under the noses of the Third Reich. "You're right about one thing, Logan," Caleb said softly. "My grandfather was a paranoid, brilliant bastard." Caleb reached into his jacket pocket. Logan's finger tightened on the trigger, but Caleb merely pulled out a small, heavy brass remote. It had a single toggle switch covered by a red safety latch. Logan froze. "What is that?" "Did you honestly think a man who smuggled a 2-ton vehicle out of war-torn Europe and buried it in a concrete bunker just left it unguarded?" Caleb lied, his voice steady, channeling absolute conviction. "The walls of this vault are lined with 20 pounds of military-grade C4. It's wired to the geothermal grid. You shoot me, my thumb slips, and we both get vaporized along with $130 million of automotive history." Logan swallowed hard, the muzzle of his gun wavering for a fraction of a second. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Caleb stepped forward, resting his hand on the sleek black roof of the Bugatti. "Are you willing to bet your family's 40-year obsession on it? Because I have absolutely nothing to lose. I am broke, divorced, and staring down a barrel. I will push this button, Logan. Try me." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The hum of the dehumidifiers felt deafening. Logan stared at the brass remote, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. The remote was actually the control module for the rental excavator's hydraulic lift, which Caleb pocketed earlier. But in the dim light of a buried bunker, it looked like death. "What do you want?" Logan finally gritted out, slowly lowering the weapon. "I want the ledger," Caleb said, picking up the book with his free hand. "And I want a head start. You think you can outrun us?" "I think your family's predatory lending firm has a lot of illegal, undocumented wealth tied up in offshore accounts," Caleb said, tapping the ledger. "Because this book doesn't just list the Bugatti. It lists every piece of art, every gold bar, and every illicit transaction your grandfather ran with mine. If I die, this book goes to the FBI, the IRS, and the SEC. Your entire family rots in federal prison." Logan's face drained of color. He had been completely outmaneuvered. Put the gun on the floor and kick it under the car, Caleb ordered. Defeated, Logan complied. The Glock skittered under the chassis of the priceless artifact. Now walk up those stairs. Slowly. Caleb followed Logan out of the vault, the brilliant afternoon sun blinding them both. Once topside, Caleb used the excavator's bucket to effectively block the steel hatch, dropping 2 tons of heavy Idaho dirt directly onto the door, sealing it tight. He grabbed Logan's keys, tossing them into the deep brush, and disabled the police cruiser's radio. "You won't get away with this," Logan spat, standing helplessly by his disabled vehicle. "I already have," Caleb replied. Caleb climbed into his rusted F-150. He had the ledger. He had the undeniable proof to dismantle the firm that had ruined his life, and enough leverage to negotiate a massive quiet settlement to ensure the secret of La Voiture Noire remained buried forever. As he drove away, leaving the desolate farmhouse and the furious deputy behind in a cloud of dust, Caleb looked at the ledger sitting on the passenger seat. He had come to Idaho with nothing but debt and despair. He was leaving as the sole custodian of the greatest secret in modern history. The Montgomery bloodline wasn't dead. It had just been waiting underground,